Hi, so we're back with Deep Images, and we have a very special episode today because it's going to be the last one that our executive producer, channel sponsor, and tonight's co-host Tim Tolbert, below me, depending on how this comes out, is going to be co-hosting with me. Something he's very knowledgeable about, and I'm kind of less knowledgeable about. But I'm still going to kind of moderate and get things going. So it's about Kaiju Iga, which translates kind of as, well, I think strange beast is what Kaiju means, but monster films, are giant monster films in Japan. And there are movies that have come before and after the Japanese ones that more or less fall into that category. We're going to mainly focus on the Japanese ones, but the first one really that I can think of, well, Lost World, 1925, and with dinosaurs, and then King Kong, and then Beast. What is a Beast from 50 million miles?
Beast from 20,000 fathoms.
No, the miles, the 5 million miles. Oh, you're right. No,
million miles to Earth and Beast from 20,000.
Right.
Yeah, see, I always make them mixed up. I know one's the Harryhausen one. That's the 50 million miles.
No.
Okay, so
20,000 fathoms.
50,000.
How deep do you think the ocean is?
Man, I don't know. We have only yet begun to explore.
That's true.
Yeah, there was that Saturday Night Live with Kelsey Grammer doing 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, where he kept correcting them how it can't be a measure of depth.
Yeah,
there might be maybe a hollow Earth that we're still not completely sure of.
Ah.
So I'm going to say, yeah, but everybody's favorite, maybe not their favorite, but the most well-known kaiju is Godzilla. Gojira is to me his real name still. But as I read it, it's gorilla plus Kojira, which meant another kind of animal. A whale? Yeah. Okay. All right. And he's kind of like a combination between a reptile and an alligator with the tail. This is stuff I've read.
Alligators are, yeah.
This is stuff I've read. This isn't what I think. I think he just looks like a giant lizard that's kind of semi-humanoid or quasi-humanoid.
Because the American cut of King Kong versus Godzilla called him a cross between a Tyrannosaurus and a Stegosaurus, although that's pretty ridiculous.
Yeah.
It is kind of...
The American cut of that film is ridiculous.
It's terrible.
We'll get into all that.
And it was supposed to be a comedy, and that it kind of tried to make it not a comedy.
Oh my gosh. All right, so Godzilla, everybody knows Godzilla, but there's been like tons of offshoots at and Godzilla's studio is Toho. You guys correct me if I get any of these names wrong. I'm usually good on Japanese studios, but with kaiju, my brain overloads.
Toho is the biggest Japanese company. It literally means Eastern Treasure.
Okay, cool. And I appreciate that. And but there were some by Dai. Is that what we decided? You told me earlier, Andrew.
Dai is E-I-A.
Which, if you look in the corner here, there's a poster that's from the first GAMERA film.
And that literally means big picture.
GAMERA means what?
Dai literally means big picture.
But what does GAMERA mean?
Game comes from turtle. Because there's also the character Gameba.
And Gappa. That's another one.
That's not related.
Yeah. Well, that's the first GAMERA film. So he comes along in the 60s after Godzilla emerges in the 50s through Dai, yeah, and he's a giant turtle. The basic idea, as I understand it, is Shiro Honda had Godzilla as a giant metaphor for the atomic bomb, and because of Godzilla or the Godzillas, they're woken up from a radioactive like A-bomb test, and or it's an H-bomb in this case, and he awakens and he's kind of angry and he starts destroying Japan. So it's kind of like a karmic thing, and it's a really intelligent, I think it's a very intelligent, strong film. I think it's actually has some creepy moments. It's beautiful black and white photography. This came out in 1954, and it's actually my favorite Godzilla movie still, after having seen quite a lot of them now. I think it just holds up on every level. But then there was the American version that came out in 1956, the Godzilla, the King of the Monsters. So they just kind of took the sort of the pronunciation of Gojira if you try to pronounce like an American would, and that's Godzilla. And it has Raymond Burr and some other actors. And Raymond Burr is playing Steve Martin decades before the wild crazy guy, and it's he's basically your audience surrogate for us, illiterate Americans who don't know anything about Japan. And he's like a reporter, right? And he goes there, and I don't know. And the editing's kind of, to me, it's kind of awkward. You watch them back to back, and it's kind of like, yeah, they kind of pulled it off, but not in every frame exactly.
It wasn't bad, but it's funny for Japanese audiences because they would put scenes in weird places. So it's like a lot of it's not dubbed. A lot of it's just Raymond Burr telling you what they're saying, and sometimes what he says they're saying is not what they're saying. So it cracked up the audiences in Japan when Perry Mason became popular. So they issued the American version with subtitles. And people laughed at it because a lot of it didn't make sense.
Yeah. Well, it's funny because that was kind of that era, and it's funny now we've come like so far as far as appreciating cult movies from other countries and seeing them in their aspect ratio, in their language, with subtitles, uncut, the last 30 some years, thanks to like Tim Lucas and Video Watchdog and the advent of DVD and companies like Anchor Bay, and then of course the internet. Now we actually are in kind of a golden age as collectors and as people who are seeing these movies, a lot of them made before we were born, as they were intended to be seen, whereas there might be people older than us who are like, what's that? Why is Godzilla in Japanese? Where's Raymond Burr? And it's like, now you know how it feels. And so
it was always funny to me because, you can kind of tell significantly the Japanese movies that are trying to be goofy and satirical. Stuff like House is a good example I can think of off the top of my head. And then things like Godzilla, which have kind of goofy moments in them, but I would say are more or less serious. And I think when people that kind of grew up with American prints or, the TV versions or, whatever that is, some of them I think are a little bit surprised, or maybe they kind of laugh out of like, oh, I didn't know that this was something that actually was supposed to be kind of serious. I mean, there are some goofy Godzilla movies, but
I
just always noticed.
Gojira is absolutely supposed to be a serious movie.
Yeah, the first Godzilla is serious, but then they started aiming them at children
pretty quickly.
So to be
pretty
fair,
quickly too.
Yeah,
I think if you see Godzilla Raids Again, it's almost as serious.
Yeah, that is true. They didn't really start aiming them at children until the 60s.
Yeah, and
I mean, the third movie, got King Kong versus Godzilla, pretty much goes for the ha-has.
Right.
That one was intentionally funny, and that was 62. So,
and that was their biggest seller. I think it still sold more tickets than any other Godzilla movie. So, any chance of keeping it serious pretty much ended there.
Yeah, and I think there's like a distinct difference too, because Godzilla movies, were kind of geared towards children, but I really wouldn't say totally children, probably like teenagers and sort of like the Japanese equivalent of like the drive-in crowd.
Yeah, it was basically the youth audience.
GAMERA movies are very like kid oriented.
Yeah, which is funny because they tend to be a lot gorier.
Well, yeah, but little kids are like, there's blood pouring out of GAMERA. GAMERA gets maimed in every single movie.
I know.
Amazing.
It makes me sad. But he's got a healing factor like Wolverine.
Yeah. Yes. And then he blows up in the last one.
Yeah.
I think GAMERA was really geared toward fans of wrestling. I mean, GAMERA bleeds like Dusty Rhodes. And that tells us that he cares, that he's really willing to fight for all children, because he takes one for the team, takes a lot of things for the team.
Yeah, he's especially they especially show his wounds when he's telepathically linked to some hapless child. And even to where in Guardian of the Universe the girl starts manifesting the stigmata, which I'm going to review that one, so I'll talk about it.
Okay. Wait, I got to pick another one then. That was one of the ones I would pick. All right.
We go with that. Double team it if you want.
Yeah, there's so much to choose from. Why should I?
Okay. You throw in your comments on it though, for sure. And but I want to do the first GAMERA. But so first, let me just kind of wrap up this intro. By now, everybody's thoroughly confused, or they're very educated. or they're like, I already knew all this. What are your fucking favorite kaijus? Get with. Do you like anything besides Godzilla and Gamera? Were there many movies besides Godzilla and Gamera? And those are legitimate questions that a lot of fans don't, or burgeoning fans don't know the answer to. I know there was a time I didn't know that. I mean, I knew the Godzilla family of Toho monsters, you know, like Mothra and Rodan, King Ghidorah, and all those guys, and I think they're all great. But so I'm gonna let Tim kind of Tim, if you have anything else to say about the genre or the medium, by all means. If not, you let me know. I'm gonna go last with my picks. So you let me know what order you want us to do them in, and
okay. Yeah, and I think I'm kind of one of those I go along with it. So off the top of my head, I don't know what I would have to say. It would just kind of be in the midst of conversation. I'm sure the spirit will move me, because you made really great introductory points, and I feel like what else?
Okay.
Say?
Well, okay, as long as we don't have to re-record it, then thank you. Okay, so we'll just proceed then. I didn't know if I blew it or not, but
no,
I was just basically. So yeah, now kaiju, of course, has become like with the people seeing the I think people seeing the uncut versions of the older movies kind of coincides, like I said, 30 years, so that roughly a little under 30 years coincides with the rebooting of Godzilla and of Gamera, respectively, in the mid 90s. And so then you have a whole generation that's only seen those movies as only as they were intended, and they've influenced, you know, another generation of filmmakers to varying levels, I guess, of success. And a lot of it, I don't know, like there are homages to those movies that some people swear by. I can't think of any that I personally like that were supposed to be sworn by, but I'm really picky. I do think some of the really, really low budget ones with bad CGI, though some of those are pretty damn entertaining. But I personally didn't like Pacific Rim. Sorry to all of you did, but I just did not like it or get into it. And it didn't affect, as a Kaiju fan, I wasn't feeling it. Maybe if I hadn't been, I would have been like, yeah, you know, but
you know what my problem with that movie is? The monsters are not very diverse. They kind of all look the same in that particular movie, at least from what I remember. It's been a couple years since I saw it.
Well, one problem is when the human characters are intended to be more interesting than the monsters, I think you failed right out the gate, mostly anyway. Not necessarily, but yeah. That's just me, though. I was starting to think of another. Well, then there's the big budget, you know, the Godzilla remakes, and then the reboots, and then the Godzilla versus King Kong. Well, I saw the first Godzilla 2010s reboot, and yeah, I thought it was terrible.
I'm not talking about that. I was talking about the Roland Emmerich piece of crap.
Oh well, yeah, no, well, yeah, that, yeah. No, the 2010s ones were better than that, but I haven't seen the other ones. Now, yeah, you guys have probably seen. I know Tim's seen all those, right? Yes. All of the MonsterVerse. So I can't comment on how good they are or not. I saw part of.
I haven't really seen any after 2000. So Godzilla 2000, I think, was the last one I saw.
It's been a couple of years. He's doing other things, you know, since 2000.
Yeah, I'm aware of them.
And all kinds of stuff.
You missed Gen Z's Godzilla, man.
Yeah, he was a born again Christian for a couple of years. You know, lots of missed.
He's been through a lot. There's videos on TikTok. So I guess for now, I'll just err on the side of sort of clockwise, but jump around. So Gamera is on the other side when this comes out, so he can't talk. But Justin Cotton, tell me about what you think of this genre. I wasn't clear on. I know there's some things you like about it and some things you don't know about, and so just give us whatever you got, man.
Well, I'm not a huge fan of this particular genre. I suppose the nearest thing I've seen to it, I did see the Roland Emmerich reboot of Godzilla, but I didn't really get into it that much. But a film I did like, which is kind of similar to it, but unfortunately not Japanese, is the Peter Jackson directed version of King Kong, which I think is about 2005, 2006. And I was kind of a fan of Peter Jackson's direction when he was very low budget and was only known in New Zealand with his monster films. And his cheap CGI, well, not CGI, his cheap makeup and gore type special effects that he had in films like Meet the Feebles, and then later on,
I love Meet the
Brain
Feebles.
Meet the Feebles, Brain Dead, and so on and so forth. And then in the mid-90s, and then he did a film with Michael J. Fox called The Frighteners, which was kind of like a ghost film set in Wellington, his hometown. And then, of course, he did the Lord of the Rings films, which were very big budget, which I enjoyed a lot, obviously, being a Tolkien fan.
And you
And then
covered on
after,
one of our recent episodes.
yeah. So he did a great job of that, all in all, apart from some minor complaints. But hard to not be any complaints in a project that big. And then in about 2005, 2006 was the remake of the 1930s King Kong film, and the classic bit on Skull Island with boulders running down hills and giant beetles and bugs and dinosaurs and so forth. I thought was very chaotic, but it was a very Peter Jackson type scene. And with the sort of zombie type tribes people on the island as well, I thought was a good touch. And that went on for quite some time. And then the actual King Kong story in New York was kind of didn't seem to take up as much of the film. But it was quite good that a picture theatre I used to go to often as a child, or was in downtown Auckland, was featured. It's called the Civic Theatre, and it was featured in the last scene in the film. That was the actual theatre that they used, which I thought was quite good for basically the climactic scene in New York, just before King Kong goes up the Empire State Building. So I thought he did a pretty good remake, and I quite enjoyed of the original mid-1930s version of the King Kong as well. It's obviously in black and white and very vintage film, but I think it's a pretty
classic.
It's a classic monster film for its time, and it's also, I think Peter Jackson was a big fan of that film, and I think he made a pretty good fist of in 2005, 2006 of the remake as well, all things considered. As far as Godzilla, I haven't really been a fan of that particular franchise or character. And as I say, I didn't really get into the more recent remake. My experience of Japanese is kind of manga films or horror in terms of things like The Ring or The Grudge. And I think the Japanese do a very, very good job of some of the scary, because I'm a fan of the horror genre as
I
well.
love J-horror.
Yeah, so Japanese horror, I think they do very well in films like The Grudge and The Ring. But I did see another film. I can't remember the name of it, but it wasn't Japanese, but it was sort of based on the Godzilla type character. Was it Cloverfield or something like that? But it was about 10 years, at least 10 years ago, and it was one where there was motion. The action was in a sort of 3D motion, like you're actually in there. So for some people,
a found footage film.
Yeah, some people actually got some. A friend of mine couldn't watch the film. He left after about 30 minutes into the film because he was getting vertigo from experiencing the motion of the way that film was shot. But I quite enjoyed that film, actually.
They should have done that in IMAX.
Yeah,
a lot of
people
would get sick.
IMAX, but yeah. I saw a film called Beowulf, which is based on the old, the sort of the Scandinavian classic from more than 1,000 years ago. But there was a sort of a 3D semi-automated version of Beowulf I saw in IMAX once. Again, that was
Neil Gaiman co-wrote
about 12 years ago. Yeah, so that was good. They had obviously a monster in it as well in terms of Grendel. So yeah, I'm sorry I can't talk directly about Godzilla or the other character, Henry, but I think the nearest.
Hey, it's okay, man. We're just glad
King
you're
Kong.
here.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks.
I'm glad you have good service from the Overlook Hotel. I know that during this time of year, the snow is really bad, and you can't get any service. So I'm glad that you were able to beam yourself up here in order to.
Yeah. Well, I've got a couple of other backgrounds from the Overlook Hotel as well. So yeah, it's one of my favorite films. So yeah. I try not to include it with business meetings, but sometimes I forget.
Wouldn't it be funny if it were one of your most hated films, though, and you had all these backgrounds for it? I did want to ask you a question, Justin, real quick.
Yeah.
Have you seen or what did you think of the 1970s King Kong?
Yeah, well, I do remember that, and in fact, I had a huge poster of that when I was about 10 years old on my bedroom wall of King Kong, sort of 1 foot on one of the
A lot
twin
of people
towers and
our age group did.
1 foot on the other, with those catching those planes. But I
The
do
Twin
remember seeing,
Towers.
yeah, the twin
Yeah, I remember when
towers.
I was a kid, one of my
Yeah,
neighbors, like he had a brother that was my age, but he was older than me, and the older brother had that on the door to his bedroom.
yeah. So that was a great poster, and I about the same time I saw the film too. So I do vaguely remember it, but I was probably only about 9 or 10 when I watched the film. So it wasn't bad. Yeah, it was a good intro into the. I remember being quite scared in that scene on the island when the monster or the ape, giant ape, first appears in that kind of human sacrifice scene. I do, that part sort of stands out when you're 9 or 10 years old. It's quite a scary part of the film. So yeah, I thought that was pretty good as well. But it's not talked about in such good terms as say the original, or and I think there's fairly good reviews of the Peter Jackson version as well.
Well, you know,
Our very first go ahead. Sorry, Tim.
the thing that I think a lot of people, but with that movie, I like the 70s King Kong, but I think that one of the reasons that especially kaiju fans kind of look down on that movie, you know, they made it with this presumption that, oh, we're better than, you know, what those Japanese do with their men in suits and all this kind of stuff, and we're going to have these amazing visual effects. And then they couldn't pull those visual effects off, and they put him in a suit anyway, which is a good suit. But I think that the hubris of them making that and acting like, oh, you know, this is how Hollywood is supposed to do it. And then they kind of had to do the suitmation. And they were like, oh, it's not so easy, you know, is it? I think that's one of the reasons why the old school kaiju fans kind of, you know, poo-poo that movie, so to speak, because
Yeah, it wasn't popular with like kids I knew who were into Godzilla, which
yeah.
I wasn't at the time. I
Mhm.
watched Ultraman. And Ultraman, of course, we can go into a whole nother. I forgot to mention that the adjacent genre, which actually kaiju, I guess, is really a
Yeah.
subset of tokusatsu of special effects films. But Ultraman, I watched as a kid. That was a huge import, and he fought kaiju every episode, and I didn't like the fact he blew up and killed the monsters. I always felt sorry for the monsters, and I'm just
Yeah.
that kind of
Yeah.
Same here.
strange.
Have you
Yeah.
seen the Australian series? Because he didn't always kill him in that one.
I haven't seen any non-Japanese ones.
There was one called Ultraman Towards the Future. It was made with Subaraya Productions, and he did kill the monsters in most of them, but there were a few where he didn't. There was one where the monster was even sentient, and he actually got him to calm down.
Ooh, wow.
Yeah,
Okay.
see that for kids, well, okay, for kids in America in the 70s who were watching after school specials, the lesson should have been to befriend the monsters, make them feel less of a monster. That would definitely be the lesson nowadays.
When I was
Diversity, everyone belongs.
Yeah, that one was 94, I think, so it was fairly late.
When I was a kid in the
Okay.
90s, you know, Power Rangers was huge. And
Mhm.
I didn't know at the time that was Super Sentai. But every time the Power Rangers, I swear, every single time that they fought a monster, the monster exploded when they defeated it. And I'm thinking, what are these monsters eating that they're just spontaneously combusting in every single episode? They always had sparks that flew out of them. I just remember being a kid being like, I don't know what is inside these monsters that's causing this to happen, but something's going to change.
Wasn't it because Rita Repulsa created them with magic and they weren't really real?
Yeah,
it's kind of like how
yeah.
they had like those Robies on Voltron, and Voltron would bisect them in every episode.
Yeah. It's just me as a kid. I'm like, really? They're blowing up again? Can't they like do something else? So...
There's a lot of. Okay.
Yeah, Justin, just to kind of make you laugh, maybe you'll think this is stupid. Who knows? I'll make a fool of myself. But when I saw Peter Jackson's King Kong in the movie theater, there was a couple where the man was super proud that he knew the names of all dinosaurs. And he kept telling his wife, like, you know, that's a Stegosaurus, that's a such and such, that's a such and such. So there's that scene they're getting chased by raptors in the movie. And he was so stoked. And he went, oh my God, that's so cool. It's Velociraptors. And I was like, I don't think they're called Velociraptors. I think they're Velociraptors.
Maybe Latin was his first language.
But for some reason, anytime I watch like Jurassic Park or anything like that, I always like go, "Oh my God, it's the Velociraptors, my thing, dinosaur."
Yeah, it was maybe a bit of a diversion in the film. I thought it sort of the focus sort of shifted from King Kong for a while onto almost King Kong meets Jurassic Park.
Yes, yeah, and I think that was a big criticism of that movie, because I remember those extraneous Skull Island scenes. People were kind of like,
Yeah.
"Oh, well, it's just basically Jurassic Park," and it's like, "Oh, he's not going to fight one T-Rex; he's going to fight 6 of them." And as a kid, I thought that was cool. My opinion of that movie flip-flops every time. Sometimes I'll watch it and really love it. Sometimes I'll watch it and be like, I don't know if I'm a huge fan of it. But it depends on the time of day and I guess how I'm feeling.
Yeah, I think Jack Black was in that film too. He was quite
Yeah,
good.
he was. Adrian
Yeah.
Brody, Naomi Watts, who of course is always brilliant at everything.
Naomi Watts, that's it. Yeah,
Yes, he played
It's,
Andaro.
it's like Peter Jackson was sort of having fun with that film, whereas he was sort of taking things almost more seriously when he did the Lord of the Rings films a few years before that.
There's some nice creature stuff in that, but it gets like the spider pit sequence it kind of drags on for a little while. You're like, all right.
The pacing, I think, is off a bit on that movie.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I think he might have gone a little long on the spider pit sequence because it's famously lost from the original.
Yeah. I think like the world building, like the way that he kind of mythically contrasts 30s New York and like Skull Island, and I mean some of the themes of that are very strong in terms of what he talks about. But I agree with Henry, the pacing's kind of all over the place. It could be like a 2.5-hour movie and I think be pretty solid. And then of course
or it could have been a 5.5-hour movie and Peter Jackson would have been just getting started.
Yes. True. Yeah.
Well, that was one difference. I was
just
going to say one difference with the 70s film is that they made it set in the 70s, whereas the Peter Jackson film and also the original, obviously, were set in the late 1930s. Yeah. So the 70s film is different in that regard, in that they had these modern jet planes for the time, firing at King Kong at the end.
Oh yeah.
Well, it's always interesting when a modern movie decides to set a story in its original time frame, because in the 70s everything was updated. But like I talked about Lolita in one of these episodes, and the remake is set in the 60s, 10 years after or more after the events of the book, for which took place in the late 40s, and then the remake, it takes place in the 40s even though it's 1997. So I guess that gives them kind of another layer of narrative whatever to it. But one thing I think about the kaiju movies and some of the stuff we brought up is that, I think the iconic characters like Godzilla and his crew and Gamera, is that regardless of how they started, they became the heroes of the films, the protagonists, and like Bill said, the protector of children and that kind of stuff, and saviors of the universe. And I think that's kind of cool, because I think it did kind of fulfill what I was wanting to see as a kid, which was that the monsters were sympathetic. And I don't know if that's because I've just always loved monsters, or probably ultimately, like a lot of these things, Marvel comics, I mean, some of the first comics I read were the Hulk, and the Hulk, the Thing, the Beast, the Frankenstein monster, or the Werewolf by Night, Man-Wolf. I loved all those guys. I thought those were the hero. I thought the monster was supposed to be the hero. And even when I first saw Frankenstein, when I guess I was maybe 6 or 7, I didn't understand. I mean, to me, I just assumed he was the hero. I just thought all those people with, I didn't have the words for it then, like I later did, for what those villagers were. But the villagers, growing up in the South, it came to me a few years later that they're like the rednecks. They're just like, and here come like the gay / black / disenfranchised guy, and they're all like throwing rocks at him and destroying his house and setting him on fire. And
yeah, that was very much with the novel where he's trying to rescue a kid and get shot in the arm. So that was very much what Mary Shelley was going for.
I read the novel when I was 8, and I thought I liked it a lot better. It took me, actually, after I read the novel, it took me a long time to take the Universal version seriously at all. I mean, I had to rethink all of it and get into my thoughts about adaptations.
It is an interesting series, but it doesn't really have anything to do with Mary Shelley's ideas or her points.
To branch off of what
it doesn't, but it's good work. What
it is.
For what you were saying, Henry, you look at what Godzilla is going to be the best example of this. He kind of goes through a similar evolution of like a character like Batman, for example, where he starts out very serious and then he kind of gets sort of trippy and colorful, and then he gets kid friendly and campy, and then he goes back to be, very dark and brooding and serious. Although, unlike some of the Batman adaptations, I think Godzilla's successful kind of any version that they do of him. Batman, I think, sometimes can get a little bit too pretentious sometimes as a character, but Godzilla, I think, goes through a very similar, type of evolution like that. And even ones now, Shin Godzilla is a great example of this. He's very antagonistic in that movie, but you're still kind of rooting for him. And he does kind of win, spoiler alert, in that movie. Not really, but the implication is that he sort of does. So, Toho kind of realized that you didn't want to kill Godzilla. They kind of stopped doing that after a certain, pretty much when they killed him in Godzilla versus Destroya, they're like, he's just going to be, around from now on, and we're not going to worry.
Which Destroya? That's obviously a direct remake of the latter part of the first one.
Not
the way they kill him. The way they destroy him, right?
Well, the monster is actually based on the Oxygen Destroyer. So,
and like the first one was the only one.
The first one was the only one where he died. The second one, they enclose him in an iceberg, which is where he comes out from in the third one.
Yeah,
but the thing is,
he goes thermonuclear. The whole movie is about that he has too much radiation, and he's basically going to go into critical meltdown. And they're trying to prevent that. He's also fighting a monster that basically was created by the Oxygen Destroyer. It's a long story. And then Godzilla reaches that meltdown period, but they're able to kind of cool him down enough to where he's not going to destroy the Earth, but he does basically melt and die. But then his the radiation goes to Godzilla Jr. and basically makes Godzilla Jr. the next Godzilla, is essentially how that would be. How that.
Well, I was going to say, the way they dealt with his death in the first one, it took me years to figure it out, when all it should have really taken was watching the first two movies and actually reading the subtitles, which what it was is the second one I had not until much later. So a big misconception that people have is that Godzilla comes back to life in the second. Okay, so you guys probably already know this. He did die in the first Godzilla. Godzilla is a species, not a person, not a individual. So in Godzilla Raids Again, that's a different Godzilla than in Gojira. So, and same thing with Gamera. I watched the end of Gamera. Gamera's destroyed. I started watching Barragan.
I thought they launched him up in a rocket and he came back down in the next one.
Yeah, he goes in a rocket in the first one.
Yeah, you're right. He comes back, but there is a line of dialogue in one of those early ones where they say a Gamera, and they make it clear there are more Gameras than just one Gamera.
Yeah, you never really see them, and in Guardian of the Universe, they imply that there was a whole race of them, because in Guardian of the Universe, the Atlanteans create them.
Well, I don't know. I don't know that there was. There was a race of Gaios. There was only one Gamera.
Yeah.
So Bill can correct me on that if I'm wrong.
Yeah, I can't remember.
Oh, your sound is a little.
Yeah, no sound.
We're not doing the silent movie episode yet.
Yeah, we are.
Still no sound.
Let's dub him in like the.
Check your audio settings, Bill.
Yeah, that's what I'm doing.
Now we can hear you.
We can hear you.
But
now we can't.
My stupid cat. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
No.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, my stupid cat stepped on this. I was wondering. Okay, I was wondering why I wasn't lighting up at all. I've actually been making comments. Nobody heard anything.
I thought you were, but I thought they were more like just asides, like and that's why I was like,
I am bombing tonight because I'm saying things and people are just like, well, whatever.
I saw the cat walk across before. Actually, that's funny.
All right, well, let's start recording.
20 minutes ago.
No, I'm kidding.
No, God, no.
Okay, you're gonna make up for it. I'm gonna go ahead and call on you next, if that's okay with you, Tim.
Oh, that's.
So go for it, just go for it, Bill.
I did want to say one thing. Justin mentioned Cloverfield, and I thought the most genius part of Cloverfield was that this monster was so big that the parasites that lived on it were their own monsters. I mean, these things which were so small compared to the Cloverfield monster that he barely even, they were like dandruff to him, are like velociraptors to us, which is neat that these kaiju are so big they have their own ecosystem. That's pretty awesome. I thought that movie was great. So the first one I'm going to pick, and it's already been sort of mentioned, Shin Godzilla.
Okay.
Because it shows something that Godzilla is one of those things that you can adapt it for the times. And, you know, you look at the first Godzilla was very clearly a reaction to World War II. Japan had just been firebombed almost to oblivion. And Japan by nature has volcanoes and earthquakes and tsunamis. The idea of some force coming out of the sea and laying waste to everything is something they could easily relate to. And then later on in the Cold War and everything, we start seeing the monsters become more alien. So alien invaders invading Japan, and Godzilla is now, whether he's a good guy or not, he's a good guy in the sense that he fights off these invaders. He might be a monster, but he's our monster.
Nationalists.
Yeah. And now you look at Shin Godzilla, and if this movie should have been called Godzilla versus Bureaucracy, because that's what it's all about. It's a comedy. I was watching this, and at some point it just like, I had this epiphany. It's like the villain in this movie is the fact that the authorities cannot get their shit together. They just keep calling meetings while this monster is just mutating and getting worse and worse. And every idea they have is either bad or it would have been good if they thought about it before, but they just can't get anything together. I'm like, yeah, that pretty much sums up my fears. I'm more afraid whatever disaster comes along. I don't want to belittle a serious thing, but I think what we just saw in Hawaii is just a perfect example of nature will throw stuff at us, and we just have to be prepared for it. And it seems more and more between COVID and these other natural disasters, we are woefully unprepared for it. The people in charge are imbeciles who were political appointments. We just throw money like that's going to magically make it go away. There's no thinking involved, or if there is, it's not being listened to. So Shin Godzilla just totally cracked me up. Plus, you know, the reimagining of Godzilla, that he starts out as this barfing tadpole and then turns into something more like what we're used to. But he's got powers up the wazoo. When they start poking at him, he's got laser beams shooting out of orifices we didn't even know he had. And by the end, there's the heavy implication that he's mutating and he's beginning to form something more humanoid. There's a little bit of John Carpenter's The Thing in there. This is a fun movie. Just not at all what I expected. It really worked to the point now they're doing Shin Ultraman and Shin this and the Shin that. That's become a code word for we've reimagined, you know.
Shin means new in Japanese, by the way.
Well, there you go. New Coke. Godzilla was better.
Yeah, there was actually a spin-off company of Toho called Shin Toho.
Oh wow.
It didn't last very long.
That's true. Yeah, Shin Toho. Yeah, I've seen a few of them.
Yeah, I might go to the well a few times, too many there. But it just shows, I think, that Godzilla will always be there. I will say one thing that's a little odd. You know, we were talking about whether it's for kids or not. I was shocked to discover a lot of the later Godzilla movies, before even some of the ones that we sort of took as more serious. When they showed them in Japan, they were often paired with some very childish anime stuff like Hamtaro.
Yeah.
That was the thing they were going for. And Japanese people I've known have told me Godzilla, he's big in Japan in the same way that Mickey Mouse is big here. Everyone knows who Mickey Mouse is, but probably most of the population has never actually watched a Mickey Mouse cartoon.
Yeah.
Is it really that bad?
Yeah.
To my knowledge, and people can jump in and correct me if I'm wrong, but to my knowledge, it took a long time for Godzilla as a franchise, as a character, to really be respected by the Japanese. They kind of thought of him as like, yeah, the people in the West like him, but we don't really, feel one way or the other. I mean, Ultraman and some of those characters were always infinitely more popular with the Japanese. I think one of the reasons Toho kept making the Godzilla movies is because they were so successful in the West. Not that they weren't successful in Japan, but even people that I've talked to, have seemed to indicate to me that, yeah, up until a certain point, Godzilla was kind of something that they were like, yeah, we're known for Godzilla, but we're not particularly, he isn't the icon that we'd like to be remembered for. And I think just recently, especially with stuff like
they're pretty proud of him now, from what I've seen.
Yeah,
but
more respect. But
there was like in the 90s when Toho was making those rather serious Godzilla movies. They all said Toho proudly presents on them.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah, but that, like I said, even later into the 70s, I think that it just was kind of, I mean, the box office receipts in Japan were kind of having more diminishing returns as they went on. And I think that because the West really took to Godzilla, especially with stuff on American TV, that's what kind of maybe made Toho be like, maybe we have something here that, we can embrace. But that's just always something that I've thought, as far as that character. Certainly, we're talking about Mickey Mouse. I would sort of think of that.
Let me so Bill, what's your, if you want to continue with Shin, if not, what is your other one you wanted to discuss?
There's so many to talk about, and
you can talk about a couple if you want.
I was going to talk about Godzilla versus King Ghidorah, the 90s version.
Oh, the 90s.
I just loved it so much, and it was so controversial. Seems silly now.
Yeah.
But it's interesting because in all the Godzilla movies, the Japanese military is a joke. People throw the word hero around very loosely, but what I think a true hero has got to be the tank commander in charge of the 100th tank or so in a Godzilla movie, that by this point they got to know it's not going to work. They keep shooting him, and nothing stops him, and he breathes fire on them, and they're all killed. But they keep shooting, and just like, are they thinking he's got to be getting tired now? I mean, maybe we've hit him so many times, we've knocked a little chink in his armor, and we can just go through. It's like, clearly, guys, save your tanks, come up with something else. It's not going to work. But in Godzilla versus King Ghidorah, we see a different Japan. The whole premise of this movie is that people from the future come back in time lying that they're here to help us because in the future Godzilla destroys Japan. So they're going to go back in time to the island.
We know that's a lie.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. They're going to go back in time to World War II, where a dinosaur was on an island, saved a bunch of Japanese soldiers, and later on became Godzilla. That's their plan.
Is Justin out?
Yeah, he disappeared on us.
Yeah, he just put that in the comments.
Oh, sorry, guys.
Okay.
Been called away.
No, you keep going.
Godzilla's still in his house. He wanted to let us.
Yeah.
He really is at the Overlook. That's the problem.
Yeah.
He's in trouble right now.
He needs to go hide in the pantry. So these time traveling dick wheels from the future are actually want to go back in time, take the dinosaur away from the island so he doesn't become Godzilla, and put 3 little cute creatures there that they will become King Ghidorah, because actually in the future Japan takes over the world. Japan is so economically successful, which is what they were thinking back in the 90s before they went into the lost decade, that it's bought Africa and Asia and the United States, and all the others are just so these people went back in time to destroy Japan with King Ghidorah. None of this makes a lick of sense, even by the loose standards of time travel movies. Godzilla versus King Ghidorah makes no sense at all. They spend all this time explaining how they're going to get rid of Godzilla, and then when King Ghidorah shows up and he's destroying things, their solution is to go get Godzilla, who for some reason is still around, even though the whole premise of this is that they were going to stop it from happening. I guess it's like Terminator. The more you try to change things, the more you make it.
Yeah, I think he comes back because they put the dinosaur's body in the ocean.
Yeah.
And then a submarine explodes and it basically brings him back to life. I think that's
science. Yeah.
It's been a while since I've seen it.
Well, as I remember it, the submarine is looking for Godzilla, and then he's already there, and they blow up. I don't know. Listen, the science in this is so.
He was there all along.
Yeah.
But I do love that this is the movie, this and the previous Godzilla versus Mothra, which is another one that's very near and dear to my heart, because on the first date with my wife, we watched the laser disc. That's how long ago this was, of Godzilla versus Mothra. And I think I found the right one. That and the fact that she knew what children shouldn't play with dead things was, that she was aware that movie existed and actually liked it. Like, well, okay, I can stop looking.
Settles it.
Yeah, done deal. But I love the way in these sort of second generation Godzilla movies, they didn't shy away from using CGI intelligently. I still love the man in suit. Godzilla should be man in suit. That's the look. That's like expecting Ray Harryhausen not to do stop motion. I mean, that's what we go there for. Suitmation has its charms, but there's some things that CGI can do really well. Laser beams, flashy effects, and they really sweeten the deal. His radioactive breath, that used to look like they shoved just a fire extinguisher down his throat, which I think is probably how they did it, now looks really cool, really impressive, and I love that stuff. Yeah. So all its deficiencies aside, its bad science, wonky plotting, dreadful Caucasian actors.
Yes.
Yeah. You can tell your son about it when he's born. Major Spielberg.
Yes.
Wow. Wink. Yeah. Oh.
That character that's supposed to be like the T-1000.
Yes.
I think that's the only movie that he did. And he is completely dreadful. And if he's watching this now,
I'm sorry. Yeah. Sorry.
Sorry. You sucked in that movie, but I do like that movie.
But, you know, and you realize something. I mean, these Japanese directors probably, they can't tell. I mean, if I hired a Japanese actor to act in Japanese, speaking Japanese in one of my movies, and he's doing it, and I'm like, yeah, I guess. I mean, for all I know, he is putting completely the wrong inflection on the wrong words. That this is terrible. And Japanese audience is going to be like, is he speaking phonetically? Is this the first time he's ever spoken Japanese? He's laughing when he should be crying. I don't know any different. I don't think they did either. Because
those 90s Godzilla movies, they're a lot more international because they start to bring in a lot of characters and actors that just speak English the entire movie. As opposed to, you know, the 60s and 70s ones, it was like they would add an actor or two in the American release. Unfortunately, all those 90s ones, I think, were all direct to video, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, they did. Yeah, I think after Godzilla versus Biollante, which I love, they stopped releasing them in America for a long time. Yeah, speaking of English,
it would be even worse because when they put them out on DVD, the subtitles would be identical to the dubbing track, which was really dumbed down.
Right. I you know, one of my favorite white actors in a Godzilla movie, Godzilla versus Megalon, which is probably my least favorite Godzilla movie.
Seatopia, yes.
The King of Seatopia. That guy.
So I actually want to go with him for Halloween. Because I have the beard, and I'm like, I want to be the King of Seatopia. No one else would know who I am, but that's fine. I tell them I was Aquaman or something, but I love that character. I don't know why I love that character so much.
He's having fun, and I actually saw an interview with him.
That's
he
Robert
seems like
Dunham.
a really nice guy. Yeah, he seemed like a nice guy. You know, they needed a white guy in a Godzilla movie.
And there's also in Return of Godzilla, which in the U.S. was Godzilla 1985. They had white non-Russian actors play Russians where they had to speak Russian the entire scene that they were in, that then had Japanese subtitles. And I think they were all like American or they were German or something. I forget exactly what their nationality was, but I just thought that was kind of funny.
So they're basically just doing moose and squirrel accents. And
pretty much.
The director didn't know any better.
Pretty much, yeah, because it's that scene. I actually love that one, Return of Godzilla, but it's that scene where, you know, the Soviets are in the submarine and Godzilla is going to attack the submarine, but they don't know what it is, and it's pretty suspenseful. But you start to pick up that, you know, Russian isn't really their first language. Even if you can't speak Russian, you can kind of tell that.
Yeah.
You can tell in the back of their head they're thinking, "Oh, did I say this right? I hope so."
I think the biggest and most embarrassing to me, and definitely don't show it to any Zoomers, or they'll be all over the internet and Twitter about it for months. Most politically incorrect race swapping is in King Kong versus Godzilla, where they get Japanese people to play Africans with a little bit of, you know, and the first few times I saw it, I was like, and I'm not super politically correct, and I was like,
but they do that in a couple, like most of the opera movies in the 60s did that. I think Gamera versus Baragon, they technically, because they do go to an island and there's some islanders in that, and they kind of, you know, I think they're
started watching
it or something. I can't remember.
It could have been worse because generally the portrayal of Africans in old school anime is almost like a minstrel show. They've got bones to their noses, and it really is very
they actually had to change the Pokemon character for looking like blackface.
Right.
Well, you know what's interesting? Just as a little bit of a tangent, I always thought that something that people don't really talk about with King Kong, the original King Kong, maybe they don't understand it, maybe they don't look for it, is that's a very racially driven movie. You know, in terms of
there have been a lot of essays about how
Yeah.
King Kong's a metaphor for the black man and how racist it is and all that, and how
Planet of the
particularly
Apes
Ernest B.
also.
Schoedsack and Miriam C. Cooper were flagrantly racist.
Yeah,
And things like that.
Yeah, and I always just thought that was interesting that people don't really. I think today's audiences don't really think about that as far as King Kong.
But let me ask you this from what Andrew just said. So, if it's supposed to be, if he's supposed to represent the black man, and they were racists, and then King Kong kills everybody except for like the white girlfriend.
It was basically Birth of a Nation.
Didn't they fail? Because,
their whole thesis of that movie is that this savage creature that's going to come and take all of your
he does die anyway. Yeah.
It's killed by modern white technologies, essentially. That's how
which was right.
And I think Marion Cooper said that he was surprised because he tried to make King Kong as like frightening and horrific as he possibly could, and then people felt bad for him when he got shot off the Empire State Building. And I think later on he kind of doubled down and said, "Oh yeah, you know, everybody feels bad," but I think initially he was quoted as saying like he felt that he wasn't successful in making him terrifying because people felt bad for him when he got shot off the Empire State.
Well, you know,
they certainly failed. They certainly failed even more. They like a year later. It's amazing how fast they did it. They made Son of Kong, which was 1000% sympathetic. You couldn't get much more sympathetic than that. I mean, I don't know. It's easy to read.
He was super gentle, and then they made Mighty Joe Young. And...
No, I was going to say Mighty Joe Young is the most sympathetic. When I saw that as a kid, and he's rescuing those kids, I couldn't stop crying. I didn't.
I'll tell you now.
I was losing it.
I choke up watching. I will choke up if we talk about this for too long. The ending of Mighty Joe Young with the orphanage is. I am actually feeling my eyes beginning to get a little heavy here because this takes me back. It's not just that it's a brilliant scene, but it takes me back to my childhood. And every Thanksgiving, for reasons I can't explain, New York, Channel 9 would show at Thanksgiving King Kong, Son of Kong, Mighty Joe Young, and either King Kong Escapes or King Kong versus Godzilla. I don't know what apes have to
damn
do.
Cool.
Yeah, what apes have to do with Thanksgiving, I don't know, but we would watch all of those.
Well, that's for us vegetarians who celebrate Thanksgiving. We got apes.
Watching Mighty Joe Young. Watching Mighty Joe Young takes me back to being a child sitting in front of a TV that was gigantic and had a little tiny screen. It was black and white, but so were the movies, so who cared? And I just remember being with family members that are no longer with us. It is just, it's a time machine.
Yeah,
it takes me back.
When I saw that, when I had the DVD and I watched it, it didn't make me cry, but I was still like, wow, oh my God. It was still like just this rush of.
I think Mighty Joe Young is a tremendously underrated movie.
I think it's a brilliant fucking movie.
Younger people that kind of get into that stuff really know about it or watch it. They probably know the Disney remake that they did, which I saw as a kid. But
even their target audience of that remake didn't like it.
Yeah, but
that movie flopped.
As a kid, I had a lot of nostalgia for that version, you know, because that was like the year that American Godzilla came out, and I kind of, I was like 7 years old or something, and I was kind of like, I'll take whatever monster movie that I can get, as whether or not it was poor.
What did you think when you finally saw the original?
I think it's a very different movie in a lot of ways. The Disney one kind of has that cloyingness to it. I mean, there's still things I kind of like about it, but the 40s one is kind of unexpected because I think you think it's going to be this like big adventure, monster movie type of thing, and it really isn't. It's
really more of a pathos kind of story to me, anyway.
It's almost not even a special effects movie, really. I mean, the special effects are front and center in that, but they're used in such a way that isn't. It's not done as a spectacle is the best way.
Well, that's why it's so brilliant, is because you just forget he becomes a real character.
Joe Young and her friend the gorilla.
Yes.
It's got some just wonderful scenes though. That scene where he fights the wrestlers is just one of my all-time favorite, with the tug of war with the wrestlers. Because boy, those are some ugly wrestlers.
Yes.